Near Gold H. Many people would say that Randy Owen's life was like a fairy tale. He made Alabama the best place for country music. Millions of records were sold, and songs were made into anthems. They went from being from a small town in Alabama to stadiums that were packed to the brim. But there was a much more complicated story behind the praise and fame. He grew up in the middle of the South in Fort Payne, Alabama. His childhood was marked by the cotton fields and being poor. Life was hard for him and his farming family because they had to work hard. Music gave me a way to get away and connect with something bigger. Even though he was good at what he did, the thought of a different life seemed very far away. Until a song called My Home's in Alabama gave him a chance at a future he had never thought possible. Alabama went off. Randy's deep, emotional voice made him the heart of the band, both in terms of singing and writing the songs. It was a tremendous success. 75 million records sold, 42 number one hits, a long string of hits that shaped a whole generation. It was the perfect American dream. But the price of fame started to show behind the genius. The man who sang about a simple life, faith, and family was losing all of those things behind the stage. Along with the long, hard tours that lasted months and the time he spent away from his wife Kelly and kids, he felt a silent sadness. He feels bad about the time he lost when he thinks about it. Randy says in his 2008 autobiography, Born Country, that he missed out on important times with his family while he was busy being successful. He wasn't with his kids for Christmas or their birthdays. Even though he had to make that commitment for his job, it slowly started to hurt him. Randy started to feel very alone, even though he had a lot of money, fame, and praise. He remembers the nights on the road when the only thing that could keep him company was tiredness. The joy of playing turned into the weight of what he had to give up, music, to get there. Ree's story wasn't just about how he became famous. In it, a young man from a poor background tried to hold on to everything he had while dealing with the costs of his success. He had a lot of money, traveled a lot, and spent a lot of time away from home, but it didn't stop him from growing apart from the people he loved the most. On the outside, being a country music star seemed like a dream life, but it wasn't always that way. It was hard for Randy to find a balance between the person he had become and the person he wanted to be. Even though he loved being on stage every night with his fans, he couldn't hide the feeling of sadness that was growing inside him. The love for his family, which had always been very important to him, seemed to fade as the years went by. In interviews, he said that he felt like he had lost parts of himself for the fame that he thought would make him happy. But success came with its own rules, which were always there. At one point, Randy started to doubt everything. How much did all this success cost? Was it worth it? He had given up family time and time with his kids. Would he ever get those things back? Even the happiness he felt when he was on stage couldn't fill the void he felt at home. And the shame of missing out on family life kept coming back to him. Randy would think about his youth when he had some free time. He would remember how his father was always there for him, even when things were hard. Randy couldn't give that to his own kids. She was in charge of everything at home by herself, while he was out on the road. Even though his kids had all the nice things that money could buy, they still didn't have their dad by their sides. The stress of being successful kept Randy from being the kind of dad his own dad had been. He felt tired and far away from music because of the steady cycle of tours, interviews, and album releases. He felt bad that he couldn't spend more time with his kids a lot of the time. Randy said in interviews that one of the hardest parts of his job was being away from them. Randy kept having trouble with this juggling, music, act as the years went by. His health also began to get worse. His body got tired from all the flying and physical demands of being on the road all the time. It became normal for him to be tired every day, and he started having health problems like bad migraines and vertigo that would only get worse over time. Randy yearning for something more real, something that fame and money couldn't buy, even though he was successful and wealthy. And even though he was the lead singer of one of the most famous country bands ever, he felt like he had lost himself in the process. As Randy Owen's fame grew, the weight of the life he had chosen grew too. Everyone saw a man who had everything: the money, the glory, and the love of a billion people. But Randy was having a hard time holding on to the things that were most important to him: his loved ones, his health, and his sense of who he is. The constant stress of having to perform well and keep up. A perfect picture was wearing thin. Randy started to think that he was living for other people instead of himself. Every night, when the crowd stopped cheering and the lights went out, Randy was alone with his thoughts and feeling more and more empty. He was mentally and physically worn out, and he felt spiritually cut off from the family he loved. When Alabama was at the top of its game, Ree's home life was getting harder and harder to handle. The band was always on the road, playing up to 300 shows a year at times. Kelly, Ree's wife, had to take care of their kids by herself. Their family missed Ree a lot when he wasn't there. He wasn't there for his kids' birthdays, holidays, or many other everyday events that a father should be there for. He wrote in his book Born Country that his kids had grown up with a dad who wasn't around much. Even though his work was going well, being away from his family caused a quiet tension. When it was too late, he found out how much he had lost. It felt like a weight had been put on his chest when he realized what was going on. The path he had chosen was harsh, and he wished he could go back in time and be more present. Even though Ree loved his kids very much, he could see that his family was starting to fall apart. He and Kelly had built a life together, but the long years of touring, making adjustments, and being on the road were starting to hurt their relationship. Kelly was a strong woman who had always been there for him, but it was hard for her to keep everything together while Randy was on the road. The more time went by, the less they seemed to care about each other. When asked, Randy would sometimes say that he felt bad about not being there for his kids when they needed him the most. He talked about how sorry he was that he couldn't be there for the little things that happen every day in a child's life. He often felt like he had no choice, though, because of how hard his job was. He had to keep going, and making money. But the damage to his body was becoming clear, and he could no longer ignore it. Alabama's success kept growing, and Randy found himself in a tough spot. The money, the fame, and the attention were all there. But something wasn't there. He began to wonder why everything was going on. Was it worth giving up his health, his family, and his happiness? Randy learned that the success he had worked so hard for was not the end goal he had imagined the more time he spent away from home. Things he had done didn't seem important when he thought about how empty his home felt. Randy would sometimes sit in his dressing room by himself and look at himself in the mirror, asking what had happened to him. The whole world was interested in him, but it made him lose himself. In the past, success seemed like the answer to all of his problems. Now, it seemed like it was making many of them worse. But Randy didn't give up. He kept going because he was driven and loved music. Even though he kept writing, performing, and making albums, his emotional problems were always there, just below the surface. He felt the weight of his choices, knowing that the road he had picked was both good and bad. Over the years, Randy learned that the things he had once thought would make him happy were not the ones that could fill the void inside him. Even though Randy had a lot of fame, awards, record sales, and a fancy life, he knew something had to change. He could no longer fight the love he had for his kids, his wife, and his life back home. He started to try to get back in touch with the important things in his life. But as the years went by, it became clearer what the price of his success was. Over the years, Randy Owen's life seemed to be marked by the big difference between how glamorous his job was and how hard things were for him personally. Despite the fact that his band Alabama was still the best in country music, the physical stress of traveling started to get to him. Randy had fought his whole life. He learned to deal with hard times when he was young and lived in the poor cotton fields of Fort Payne. He didn't expect the stress of being in the spotlight and the hard physical work of his job to hurt him in such unexpected ways. When the band's popularity went through the roof in the 1980s and 1990s, Randy had to deal with more than just being worn out. He started to have terrible migraines, vertigo, and constant dizziness, which sometimes made it impossible for him to do anything. Even though Randy was having health problems, he kept going. He kept going on tours, making CDs, and playing every night for thousands of fans. The show must go on, as they say in the music business, and Randy was set on not letting his fans down. But as his health kept getting worse, the cracks in the mask started to show. Randy had to cancel a few shows in 2019 because his symptoms were getting worse, which made fans wonder what was going on behind the scenes. In talks during this time, Randy said that he had been dealing with long-term health issues for years but had kept them secret from everyone. Headaches, vertigo, and feeling tired were becoming normal parts of his life.